as I mentioned earlier, we're going to do another routing thing here. Before we created a single route and a single view, we have a sort of main layout view that is now called index instead of layout. Yay! We have our so we have that. We have a single route that renders a partial. Let's go ahead, and what we're going to do today is we're going to look at a couple of different kinds of routes so that you can then go forward and create all of the routes that you need. So we're going to create a new controller module to look at these routes. We're going to go ahead and create a post controller module. So let's go to our terminals, not in the tab with that running, yay, and do touch app/js/controllers/posts.js. So we're now creating a file that will oh my god, words. Oh my goodness. Okay, we're creating a new file that will hold the module that we will create that's going to have our new controllers in it. Just as a reminder, modules are these sort of very separated parts of the code. We inject these modules into our code, into our app, just like we inject other libraries. It's just sort of collected areas of functionality. So let's go ahead and we've created this new file, and before we even forget about it, but since we've created this new file, let's go ahead and go to our index.html and add it here to make sure we load this file. So in our index.html, which should be at the very top level of your project directory, right inside blog, we'll do script source equals app/js/controllers/posts.js. It is literally exactly the same as the line above it, except instead of saying layout.js, it's post.js, because that's the name of our new file. So now we just tell our computer, hey, make sure that you actually import this file when you load up. Telling our server, telling our app. Cool. So let's go and open up that file, that post.js file, and we'll create a new module. Just really quickly for reference, let's take a look at layout.js. So up here in layout.js, super cut off on Sublime for me. Sorry, everybody. You can see that in this file, which we're creating a similar file right now, we have our new home controller module that we create. It's this angular.module home controller module. This is the name that we'll refer to it by in other places in our app. And then we pass it an empty array. And then we add to this module that we've created new controllers. So just to keep that in our minds, to remember we've done this before. This is what that looks like. So let's go and do that again. So we have our var post controller module equals, can you see that in the back? Cool. Equals angular.module. When we add parameters, we're running this function to add this module, to create this new module. We're going to call it post controller module, and we pass in an empty array. And then we add a semicolon to the end of that. So just like we did in the other one, except we're using different names here. Posts instead of layout. Cool. So now we can inject this module that we've created into our app. Right now it doesn't, yes? Yeah. Whoops. So we've created this module. Just like we had to add this new page to our index to make sure that we load the correct page, that we load this in that script tag that we added, we'll also have to add this module to our app. To make sure that we remember to load this module. So we go to app.js, and we can see up here near the top we have this blog app. We created this new Angular module before. We called it blog app, and we injected UI router and home controller module. So we'll go ahead and add post controller module to this list. Don't forget to put a comma after home controller module. You will get an error if you forget. And it will not be the error that you expect it to be. Cool. Absolutely. Yep, I understand. Thank you for asking me to pause for a second. Cool. So now we've created this new controller module. We've injected it to the appropriate places. We don't actually have a controller yet. We just have this module. But if we go back to our app and refresh, inspect element, and look at our console, we shouldn't get an error. It should just be like, yep, cool, that's fine. This, again, this is a plugin error. This is not an error in our code. But it loaded that, and we should be able to see, not here, where does this live, that we've loaded, in our network tab, we can see we loaded post.js. So we're loading that file. It's being injected correctly. We aren't getting errors. We haven't done anything with it. Like, it just kind of hangs out. It's not doing anything yet. But this is just the step in creating this new module. Cool. So let's actually do something. Let's actually create a controller. So we're going to start creating a couple of controllers and views. Before we get into that, let's talk about, there are sort of 4 steps to every new view controller pair. The first step is actually creating this controller. The second step is creating the route to this view controller region. The third step is creating the view. And the fourth step is actually linking to the view. You can, of course, skip this last step and just type everything into your browser URL area. That's like pretty bad user experience, right? Like, meh. So I have this listed here. We'll go through these steps. What we're going to do is we're going to create 3 controllers. We'll go through these steps with each of these controllers. But yeah, so creating the controller, creating the route, creating the view, and actually adding a link to this new view. So let's go ahead and create our first new controller. So we'll go back to post.js. I'm going to pull up layout again just for reference one more time to remind us we've done this before and walk through the steps we already took. So before we took this module that we'd created, we did a .controller method on it to create this new controller. We told it the name that we're calling this new controller, and we passed in some parameters. In this case, we passed in scope, HTTP, and the function that we actually want, which is like the contents of the controller, the stuff that the controller actually does. And this function also takes parameters, which are scope and HTTP. These are those libraries that AngularJS already sort of knows about that we're adding in here. So let's do the same sort of thing with posts. So we go to posts. We have our post controller module. So let's do post controller module dot controller. We're passing in parameters. Let's call our first one post controller. We're going to create a controller for our index. By convention in AngularJS, typically that's sort of the plural version of whatever it is you're displaying. So this is an AngularJS convention. We could call it whatever. This is a place where we could pass in whatever name we want. We're going to stick with the convention and call it posts instead of calling it index or something, because this is the Angular way. So we add a comment and we pass in this block of dependencies that we want to inject here. We'll give it scope. We'll give it HTTP, and then we'll start our function. And again, this function takes $scope and $HTTP, but without the, what's it called? The things, the quotation marks, that's the word, sorry. Okay, so outside of these parentheses, but before we close the array, we do our curly bracket function thing and hit enter. I'll scroll back over to there so that we can see the end of this line again. And this basic part is sort of what we expect out of every controller we're going to create, right? That we have this module, we call this method on the module, we name our controller, we pass in the dependencies, we actually pass the parts of these dependencies to this function, which is what this thing is right here. And then we start our function of controller. So every controller you create is going to have a first line that looks something like this one we just added. And it's going to have a last line that's this curly brace close, array close, parenthesis close, semicolon. So later on, I hope that you all will go at some point and refactor all of this and pull the like data that we put the other day, right? Like we created an index page sort of. Like you can refactor this out. We're not going to take class time to do this right now because it's literally just like copying things in one place and pasting them in another. We can talk about that later with the question session if you're so inclined. Just right now, so that we know sort of what's going on, I'm just going to add a model, which again is a variable that lives on the scope that the view and the controller both can see and interact with. We'll just do scope.name equals host controller, yay! So we can see that we're actually using this controller when we create the view. We have some data that we can pull in and look at. Cool, so that was step 1, create the controller. Now, let's go ahead and do step 2, create the route. So that happens in app.js. Also, there's going to be a lot of repetition today, yay! So as we can see before, we created a route before. Also, this is a good point to mention. So in the PhoneCat tutorial, instead of using UI router or using state provider, you use route provider. So we're using a separate sort of third-party library to do our routing. They both do just about the same thing. They're very, very similar. The main difference between the two, though, is that the router that comes sort of out of the box with Angular, the official like Angular, the ng route, that only allows you to have one partial per page. You can't do multiple partial views, which means if you have your layout and then you're rendering partials inside this layout, you can't then also have another partial in there. And that's a pain, right? Like that's really irritating. People will use partials to pop up like modals or to have a little window in there. I don't know. You do a lot of things with that. And so having this UI router, this UI view, which gives us state provider instead of route provider, is pretty cool. So I'm going to do that. So before, we also created routes in here. This is our sort of routing area, right? The state provider thing. So we're adding all these chains. We're chaining methods to this state provider object, which comes from this UI router library. So we're doing .state, which creates a new state. We called it home. Just like you name routers in Rails, you can call it like post path or home path or root or whatever. We gave it a URL that we want to show up in the browser when we travel to that place. And it has a template URL. So we're going to do the same thing here. So after this close parenthesis, but not on a separate object, we're going to do .state. And just to sort of drive home that that's what that's doing, so let's look. We could, if we wanted to, rewrite it so it looks, well, that's too big, sort of like this, right? That we have state provider, .state, and then some code in here, and then .state, and then some code in here, and we're just chaining them onto this same place. We're just doing line breaks because otherwise it would be really hard to look at, right? Like normally you do these line breaks, but yes, Sublime. I don't want to purchase you. Thanks, though. Cool. So let's add a new route. So we have our .state, which we just created. Let's call it posts. Whoops, posts. And add a comma, and then we start a block. So we'll give it a URL, and we'll do /posts, which is pretty standard for indexes, right? We add our comma, and then we'll add another template URL, just like we did before. app/views/posts.html. Later on, if you want to put these in separate directories, your views to have like a post view and a home view and whatever, go for it. Right now, I just have it all in views because I'm lazy. So this is just like we did before. We've got this right here. Pretty cool, right? I don't think you actually need the comma there, but what's it going to hurt? Yes. After these? No, because we're chaining this method. Actually, if we had a semicolon there, it would break because this is not a separate thing happening. So we could put a semicolon right here at the very end if we wanted to, because we're ending this chain. But all of these .state methods, both of them, are attached to the state provider object. So if we wanted to, we could have them all sort of in line. We could rewrite this if we wanted to. Actually, let me put this right here. Don't actually write this code. This is not code you want to write. But we could do like state provider .state a state. Of course, it would have this other content, this block that we created in here, .state, another state. Like, this is effectively what we're doing. We're just adding line breaks so that it's readable, which is also sort of the convention. Other questions on this part right here? Cool. So we've now created step 2, finished it, create the route. Not too bad, right? Pretty easy. And exactly like what we did before. So now we're going to have to actually create this view that we talked about right here, this app/views/post.html. So let's go back to our terminal, touch app/views/post.html. Cool, so now we're creating that new file. So we can actually show that file when we navigate to that route. We have that template existing. All right. I'm going to go ahead and open that up. We're good? Okay, cool. So we can go to views and then post.html, and it's got nothing in it, of course. So the big step, anytime you add a view, like the important part, is to tell it what your controller is. So I'm going to add a div ng-controller equals, and then we'll use that controller we just created, the post controller. Right? I think that's what it's called. Let me double check real fast, because I have the memory of a goldfish. It is indeed the post controller. So you created this div, we'll end this div, and anything that we want to put in this view should be inside here, inside this post controller. Otherwise, it doesn't know what the controller is. And since we, since we created that other attribute in our controller, we created the scope.name. Let's go ahead and just call this name. We'll print that name to the screen so that when we load this page, when we go to this view, we can see, yep, this is the controller we think we're in. Like, we're on this page, definitely. We're looking at the view that we think we're looking at, and we're pulling in information from this controller since we defined name on the post controller. Okay, so if we wanted to, we could stop here and just navigate there. Let's go ahead and add a link to our layout, though. Let's add a header to our layout so we can actually click on something to get to that point. So if everyone is good here and has this code in their view, I'm going to move on. So we go over to index.html. We've completed 3 of our 4 steps at this point too. So inside the body of our view, but not inside this div UI view. We don't want to put things in here. It's just like a yield block in Rails. So above that, but inside the body, let's create a div class equals header. I'm doing that both so we can remember, hey, this is a header, and so later we can style it if we want to. So I'll go ahead and close that div. And then inside the header, we'll create 2 links. So we're going to do an I and then a UI sref, which is just about exactly the same thing as an href, except instead of doing this href, this hyperlink reference, I don't actually know what that stands for, I'm not going to lie. It's doing a state link here with this UI router. So this is a directive provided to us by the UI router. So first, let's do one that brings us back home, because it's always irritating when you have to click back, right? So this navigates us to the home state. Do home/a, and then let's create another link, UI sref equals .posts. And this one should actually take us to our new index page that we've created. Okay, so this is the 4th step, right? Like, we've just created a new controller and a new view. Let's look at it. Typically in AngularJS, anytime you create a new controller or change app.js, so anytime you actually create a new controller or change app.js, specifically anytime you change app.js, you do want to restart your server because you're changing the whole application. You're not just changing a small piece of it. So I'm going to stop the server and then restart it. I'm going to open up an incognito window. I'm going to go to localhost. And it's not showing. There we go. So I refreshed in localhost, and now I can see these header links. So I can go home. Nothing happens because I'm already at home. This is the contents of home.html, right? Then I can click on posts. Hey, it's there. So we know that this worked because we're on a new view. We can look at our URL and see that it now says /posts. We can see this information, so we know that we're in the right template, and it's showing us the actual data here that we defined in our controller. So we know that our controller is hooked up. Yes. Sure. Any questions too while we're taking a second? Excuse me. I'm gonna thing with this. Yeah. Okay. That looks like a rerouting issue, I would guess. Can take a look at that real fast. My guess, just off the cuff, would be that if you go, wait, you put your links in your layout.html, or your index.html, sorry. That's interesting. All right, cool. I will come take a look at that with you real fast while we give people a minute. Oh, wait, so refresh again. Okay, so first let's open up our console window in our browser and then YouTube start. Yeah, just keep it open all the time. So let's refresh again. Let's also open up an incognito. Oh, modular. Yeah. Great. So let's go look at your application. I don't know. Also, we changed out that and then maybe kill that incognito window. Oh, open up your browser. What's up? All right. Anyone else? Yeah. Where's control? Where? I don't know where that. It says all right. Everyone ready to move on? Cool. Not disappointing Aaron. All right. Now, as I mentioned before, we're going to have some repetition today, so we're going to do 2 more slight variations on this same thing. The other 2 things we're going to do, we're going to create a nested partial, so a partial inside this partial. What we're going to do is we're going to create like a new, so that you can be looking at the index of posts and click on your new button and just like add a new post without even having to look away from that page. In my professional life, I've used this particular thing mostly to like make modals or something that pop up on the page, like a window that pops up and that you interact with more and do a lot of different stuff with it. You can do a lot of different things with nested views. And then the other view we're going to create is a view that takes a parameter. So like for your show page that you need to have your ID that you're passing there. So we're going to do the same thing, these same 4 steps, 2 more times with slight variations in each time. And then after this, you'll be able to refactor all the stuff we did in class to make like 90% of your project. So, cool. Let's create our next route. We're going to start out with this nested partial view. So remember, our first step is we're going to create the controller. So let's go back to our post.json. Since all of this stuff we're creating today is sort of post related, we're going to go ahead and keep it in this module, but we're adding new controllers. So this is going to go to the very bottom, the very bottom of this page. It's not going inside anything. We'll do create a new controller. And we're adding it to this post controller module. So we'll do once again post controller module.controller. Let's call it new post controller. And then again, we pass this in. So first we have in our quotation marks, $scope, comma, quotation mark, $HTTP, comma, function, parenthesis, and then we're putting these same things that we injected that we said, hey, load these libraries, scope and HTTP. We're now grabbing these actual pieces of that library, scope and $HTTP. And then we add another block. This is literally exactly the same as the first line on the other controller here, except the name is different in parentheses right here. That is the only difference between the 2 so far. Now, once again, we're going to add another variable just so that we can see another model, so we can see that the view is being rendered and that the controller is being used here. So once again, we'll create this new model, which is a variable that the view and the controller both have access to. We'll do scope.newName, just so we can see and know that we're not loading name again. It's a different thing. Equals new controller. Woohoo! Should have added a semicolon up there too. I'm lazy at JavaScript, but so again, this is exactly the same as the other controller that we made. The only difference is that we're naming it differently. Instead of post controller, it's new post controller, and instead of scope.name, we're creating scope.newName, and we're putting some different content in here so we can clearly see the difference between these 2 things. Okay, so that's step 1 down. Create a controller. Done. Now we create a route. So we go back to our app.js. Once again, so if you added a semicolon here, get rid of that semicolon at the end of that state, because we're chaining these states on that same state provider object. So we'll do .state. And this is going to look a little bit different because it's nested. It's added to this current state. What we want to be able to do is to have our sort of posts index page and then have that smaller new page show up inside of it. So instead of just calling it new, we're going to call it posts.new. And we'll add a comma and our block. And this is going to look a little bit different as well. So similarly, we'll have a URL again, and we'll call it, let's say, new post. You can call it whatever. You can call it /new. You can, but for now we'll do this, and you can refactor it later if you are so inclined. But instead of doing a template URL right here, we're going to add views. And then a bracket. So views is an object, or views is a key to an object. And inside here, we're going to name our first view. We'll call it new. And then we pass that another object. And then it is just template URL app/views/new.html. Okay, so once again, differences here. Or similarities here first. We are chaining this state method onto the state provider again. We are giving it a name, we're giving it a URL, and we are passing in the template that we want it to render when it gets that URL. Differences because it's nested instead of a standalone route that we're creating here. Instead of just having the template URL as this top level thing here, we're creating a views object. Views has a name. We're naming our first view here. We're naming it new, and we're giving that the template URL. In theory, you can create a bunch of different views for your nested partial here. We're just going to create one. If you would like to explore that, you're welcome to explore that more, but we're just going to create one. Cool. So we've created our route. Yay, step 2 down. Everyone good to proceed from here? All right. Also, a note as well, because I do have this code up on the daily curriculum. In addition, I added some notes in that code. We'll scoot down there too. Sorry. Don't get dizzy. All right. I added some notes in here as well. Don't put comments in the middle of things. That will break things. That's scary. Cool. So let's move on to step 3, which is to create the view. So in our, right here, we'll do touch app/views/new.html. You could name this something different if you want, but the route here has to match the template URL that we just added to app.js. So, all right, let's go ahead and open that file, and it's going to look very similar to what it looked like before. So let's compare real fast. We'll take a look at post.html to see what we did there. We named our controller. We put in some content that showed us this variable that we had created. So let's go into new and do that same thing. So we're going to do div ng controller equals new post controller. We're going to say new name is, and then we'll put that new name in there so we can see the difference between this and the code that we wrote previously. I'm also going to say, so since this is inside this parent of posts, and there is a controller on that parent, let's see what happens if we try to call the variable that we named in there too. So I'll say name on posts controller is name. We'll just see what happens. It'll be a fun experiment. And then we close our div. Okay. Step, I don't even remember, 3, 2, step something. Step something is done. Hooray! Okay. Let's go ahead and create a link to our new view. Since this is happening inside of our posts, we're taking this index page, let's go ahead and put our link inside post.html instead of having it on the index, because that would be silly. The user experience we're thinking of is you're like looking at a list of posts and then you're like, yeah, I'll add another one. So we're going from there. So we'll add a new line. And again, we do our link, our UI sref. And however, even though we named that route .post.new, since it's nested inside this other route, it already knows about .posts. We don't have to add that part. We can just do .new because it already takes this parent state and adds this .new to it. So we'll close that, and then we'll say add, what? Nothing happened. Finger slip. Okay, add a new post. And then we'll close that tag. And now though too, since it's not rendering in that same UI view, right? Everything else was in that UI view. All of these partials were showing up in that UI view that we put in our index.html, just like a yield block in Rails. So in this nested view, we'll have to add another UI view, which is like a yield block in Rails, so that this partial that we just created actually shows up. So we'll do once again, we'll do div UI view. And since we had multiple views, since we had this list of views, we'll go ahead and say UI view equals new. We're telling it, hey, when you render something here, make it this thing right here. Okay, and then we close that div. All right. So that's our fourth step there. Let's go ahead and see what happens. We did make a change in app.js. So I'm going to restart my server. Then I'm going to open up a new incognito window. And I'm going to go to localhost. Refresh the page. Cool. So we should see, we're seeing 2 links. This is the number of links we're expecting. So let's go to posts. We're not seeing, okay, I had to refresh here as well. Caching is fun. So now let's click on add a new post. Cool. So now we see we've rendered our new partial. This is our new partial here. It's a little hard to look at because we didn't add any breakpoints in here or any line breaks. But we can see we know we're rendering this template because code that we wrote in that view is showing up. We know that we are hooking up to that controller because new controller woohoo, which is text that we put in that controller in this model that we created there, which is a variable that can be used by the controller and the view, shows up. Also though, we can see this name on post controller thing that we created. So our new controller doesn't know by itself what name means. We didn't define it there. However, since this view is nested inside of the other view, it still has access to those other variables and to that other scope. It can see that because it's inside this view. So if we look actually in our inspector, and I apologize because I don't know that I can make the text very big here. Oh, I can, hooray! Cool, so if we look here and we look at the body, and we look inside this view, we can see we have our div with our controller, and that this other view that we have right here is inside of that controller. So both controllers sort of apply. The more specific controller applies more. So let's see what happens if we go back to new name. I'm going to make a couple of changes just to show how this sort of prevalence here works. So I'm going to go first to new. I'm just going to go ahead and comment this line out. I don't want to have to think about this one right now. So we're just looking at name. And I'm going to just have it say name is. So right now it's showing the name on the post controller because we don't have a name defined on the new controller. I'm going to go back to post.js. And let's just change this from new name to name. So now we're defining it in both places. Let's see what happens. Refresh. All right, so we can see that that changed. We only have name showing up, and it's showing the version of this variable that we defined on the new controller because it's more specific. Just like if you're writing something in Rails and you're inheriting something from this parent class, like if you have like a class called animal, right, and it has an action called talk or something, and talk is just like make noise. But then you have this class called dog that inherits from animal, and dogs make or talk, def talk says like bark. If you call dog.talk, it will do bark because bark is more specific to this particular object than, make noises. Does that make sense? Sorry, without the visuals, that was a lot of like, follow the words that I say with your mind. But we're looking at the more specific definition here. Awesome. Yes.
This is maybe a big question.
Okay.
I guess I get that this controller and this view is different from the other ones because we want it to like add to the current page and it's not its own page somewhere else. And I get that we have that div that's such a real div.
Mm-hmm.
But how, like, what's going on when we click the link that it knows that we're talking about yielding and not going somewhere?
So that.
Does that have something to do with the weird range and structure in JS?
So the question was, how are we actually rendering this partial? What's happening when we click on that add a new post link that changes things, and how does that relate to the changes we made in app.js? That's a great question. So let's go back to posts and look at this. So let's take a look at our URL here in posts. It's localhost, then like the /posts. If I click on add a new post, we can see that this route right here changes, right? So our state here has changed. We now have, additionally, this new post here at the end. This is what we did in app.js. We said, hey, at this state, at this post.new state, we want our URL to be new post. However, since it's added, it's nested into this other post state. It has posts in front of it. And then it renders those things, it displays that view. Just like if I change this view between home, then it shows the home partial. In this case, we renamed the URL. Or if I do posts, it will show the post partial. When we have posts/new post, it shows the new post partial, which happens to also include this parent because it's nested inside. Just like when we go to posts and it includes the parent that it's nested inside, which is this index.html. The nesting is different there since we just have this single yield, the single UI view, but we can see our header. So then when we navigate to new post, we see the new post template content, and we also see the things around it. So clicking on this add a new post, it's just like a link. It's just changing the state from posts to post.new.
So the part that tells it that it should be nested is the post.new in the state?
There are a couple of parts that tell it to be nested, yes. One of them is this post.new, that we're adding this state to posts. The other thing that tells that we have this inner div, this UI view inside of that other part. Primarily, yes, it is that post.new that says, hey, we're making a nested view here. And then we tell it, hey, show this nested view. Does that answer your question? Okay, we can talk about it more too. If there are other questions about this, otherwise we'll go ahead and move on to passing a parameter. Okay, cool. So again, we're gonna create a route that passes a parameter, just like a show page. We start with, just like we started before, we start with creating a controller. And again, it's going to look pretty much the same as the other controllers that we've created. So at the end of post.js, we'll do post controller module because we're adding it to this module. dot controller. We pass it some stuff. We're going to pass it the name. Let's go ahead and call it post controller. Again, this is an AngularJS convention. The name of the view controller is like a single instance of whatever that thing is. And then we're going to pass it a couple of things. We're going to pass it the same things we passed before. First, we're going to give it the scope. I did that wrong. And the quote, and then add the comma. We're going to give it the $sign HTTP. But then we're also going to add something called state params. And what state params does, similar to scope in HTTP, it is something that comes with Angular, and it exposes the params to you, to your controller. So you can look at the parameters that you're passing. So we have that, and then we do the function. Whoops. So thus, we have scope and HTTP, and then state params. That, and then that one. So up to this point, it is exactly the same as our sort of baseline controller up here. It has a slightly different name. That's the first difference. And the second difference is that in addition to the other things that we have passed through all of our controllers, we're also passing this new state params thing. So state params goes there and over here as well. And let's, again, we're going to create a model, which is a variable that is accessible by both the view and the controller, just in case I haven't said that enough today. We'll call it post name and say that it equals, this is the post view, so that we can keep track of that and see that that's rendering. Let's go ahead and add another model. We'll add scope.id. We're going to be passing a parameter of ID, so let's see what that parameter looks like when we get it. So in order to look at that parameter, we'll do state params.id. We have not yet passed this, of course, but when we do, we want to be able to look at this. So again, exactly the same, other than the different name right here, different value in our like tester to see if we're looking at the right thing. And we're adding in state params in our injection up here and over here. And then we're going to look, we're adding another model called ID so we can look at what the state params ID looks like. All right. So our step 2 is to create the route. So we'll go ahead and go to our app.js. Once again, we're adding it to the end of this chain of methods on this state provider. I almost said state params. On this state provider object. So we'll do .state. We'll give it a name. Let's call it show. We'll give it a block. We'll give it a URL, just like before. In this case, though, we're going to have the URL will be /post/ID. And ID is a key. This is just like when you're defining a URL with a parameter in Rails, just like that. Cool, so we pass ID, and then we'll pass a template URL, app/views/show.html. So it's pretty much what we've seen before. The only real difference is that we're adding this ID to the URL. Nothing real mind-blowing. Yes?
Is it significant that we're not doing posts.show for the state?
It is not. Sorry. My mind was in two places. Right, so we could do post.show if we wanted to. That would make it nested inside this post thing. The main reason why we're not doing that right now is because I wanted to add one new thing each time to this sort of main piece. You could nest it inside that, absolutely. We're not going to do that right now just to decrease complexity, because this is just meant to be a like, yep, routes, controllers, we can do this thing kind of a talk. Cool, so we've created our route. Let's go ahead and create our view. Big shock, we're going to come to the terminal and do touch app/views/ let's call it show.html. And we'll go ahead and open that view. And just like before, we're going to give it an ng controller. It's our post controller that we created before. We're going to show what the post name is. Post name. So we can see that we're actually using this controller and that we can get data from this controller. And then let's do template URL. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading from the wrong line. I apologize. It's still the morning. We'll do the ID. We're going to show the ID so we can see what the ID looks like. And then we close that div. So exactly the same as the other ones. We're naming our controller. We're putting something in there so we can see that everything is sort of what we expect it to be. We're rendering the right template. We're hitting the right controller. And we're also going to look at this ID object to see that this is exposed. And then let's create a link. So in the future, when you're actually doing this on your app, you'll want to dynamically grab this link. Let's go ahead and do that a little bit with our index.html. So if we go to index.html, by index I mean home, I'm sorry. Let's go to home.html because currently home.html has all of our post objects exposed, right? So our posts have an ID. This is what we'll want to do when we're actually doing the show page, which is to grab that ID from that post and then show that particular post. So on this page, we should have a line of code that says, it has like, I'm going to search for it, but it should have the post.title, not the new post, but down here. So for me, it's on line 23. It's inside our ng repeat post in posts with our filter on it, and inside this, H2. So this is just displaying the title of our post right now. Let's go ahead and add a link around it. So I'm going to hit enter a couple times. Let's do our A. If you would rather, you can also just hard code this in somewhere else. That's totally fine. But we'll do our UI sref to link to a state. And we're going to do show. And the only big difference here is we're going to add some code in here. So we'll do our brackets to say you should evaluate this code. Otherwise, it would just pass it as a string. And inside our curly brackets, we'll do ID is a key, and then post.id. This is pretty similar to what you would do in Rails, right? You would tell it to evaluate the ID of the post and then build that link, build that URL off of that. Yes?
So if you have to send it in, like a hash or something, do you always have to include whatever like your wildcard thing was? Like in the link you did like :ID, and so it would always have to, you would always have to tell it which one you're, I don't know.
To verify that I understand the question, I believe it is, do you have to specify the key for what you're passing?
Yeah.
Like we did in the app.js? Yes, you should specify the key of what you're passing as you go through.
So it won't just, like if you have like more than one, it would just go in order of, like,
No, it's not an array. It is an object that we're building here. So we're building this sort of parameters object, right? And so you should specify what the key is. I will say it is possible that you can do that not that way. This is, if you can, even if you can just put the ID in, this is better practice to specify this is the ID and then give it the value so that it is explicitly saying what that is. But yeah, I would recommend that you follow this, even if it is possible to not do that. This is what I do when I am building these routes. So. And clearly, as a junior developer, I know all of the things. Cool. So we've done our last step, which is to create this link. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. Once again, I'm going to restart our server because I restart my server aggressively, which is a good sort of debugging choice. I'm even going to close that incognito window and this one and open a new one. And we'll go to localhost. And That is interesting. Something is broken. Let's take a look. Everything is broken. Yeah, cool. Error parse syntax. So it's not going to give me a nice link.
We need like a dot after in the
App.
show. You know, we have show and then a mustache brackets.
Ah,
Maybe a dot
ah,
slash.
ah. I believe you are correct. Oh, but it still doesn't like that. Unexpected token. Post.id.
Where was the dot that we just added?
I added one right here in the link.
Do we need one after show for the mustaches or a slash?
I don't think so.
A slash.
Let's find out. No. Okay. Unexpected token. So let's look at what this is actually telling us. This is some fun experiments in active debugging. Actually, let me try one thing that I think might be the issue. Yes. Okay, cool. All right. So, it's still not giving me the link though. Inspect element, UI href, show ID, post ID. That should do UI sref. Not doing the thing that I wanted to do. Hooray. So debugging looks like this a lot of the time. Yay. I'm going to try it without that and see just in case. Nope. Okay, cool. I do think that we do need that though. I don't remember. Awesome. Let me make sure that you don't do that. No, you don't. Cool. Let's try that and see. That's a good idea. I like it. Apparently it does not though. Give me, let's see. Could not resolve dot, aha. Okay, cool. Could not resolve dot show from state home. All right, cool. So let's talk about what just happened and how we got there. So what happened was an error, of course. Things were broken, which happens. I don't know who said parentheses. Whoever said that is a very smart person. So the issues that we were having, we had a couple of issues. One is just a syntax issue because I wasn't paying attention. So the difference between the double brackets, we changed two things, and then let me start over. We changed three things here, and then we changed one of them back to what it was before. The first thing that we did was we went from double brackets to single brackets. So double brackets, what that indicates is, hey, render this, like use this as Angular. Like don't just read this and put this out as a string. However, we're already using this as Angular, right? Like this is Angular happening. Anytime you're in a directive, it already knows that it's Angular. So I wasn't really thinking, I did the double brackets. What I really wanted was the single bracket, which says, hey, this is an object. That's the same sort of thing it says in Ruby, in plain JavaScript, this is an object. So we needed to tell it that it was an object instead of saying, hey, render this thing again. That was just, we were just confusing it, right? Like that was bad syntax. So that was the first thing that we changed. The second thing was that we added the .show, which we switched back, and we'll get back to that in a minute. The third thing was using parentheses. I don't know who said that. Whoever said it was right, and I probably would not have gotten to that as quickly. This is why pairing is a good thing. So we are passing this parameter to the show method, to the show sort of state. And so giving it these parentheses tells it that we are passing it as a parameter. So then once we got to there, we had an error message. I'm actually going to put that period back in there so we can look at that error message again. Cool. So I clicked on that and it gave me an error message. And the error message it said was could not resolve .show from state home. So when you have the dot in the state, what that's doing is it's nesting that, right? Like it is adding that in there. We saw that with new. When we did posts, we had post.new was how we defined the state. And when we actually used it in there, we just had to do .new because it knew that the parent state there was posts. In this case, the difference between adding this to the layout and to this home.html is that we have a different parent state, right? When we're adding it to the layout, the parent state is just like the top level, right? It's not adding it to this specific substate. However, when we have it in this post view, where we were trying to do home, or this home view, sorry, we were trying to do home.show, and the route home.show does not exist. The route home exists and the route show exists, but they don't exist together. So by removing that, instead, we actually create, where instead of referencing like this parent element dot whatever state, or I guess the other direction for all of you, parent state dot whatever state, we're just saying this state. Cool. So we can click on that and see we're now at our new view. We have this variable that we defined in our controller, so we can see there that we're rendering that template, and that we have access to that controller, and that ID that we have here, we're passing through. We passed through the ID of that element. It's 123 ABC here. We can go back and go down to turtles are weird and click on that, and we have a different ID. So we're correctly passing these IDs through through this, and our controllers can access that. And once we have real data, our controllers can use that to grab information about that post and show that post, let you edit that post, whatever. What questions do we have about that?
What percent of links still, even though like the syntax matches?
We can go through and debug it in just a minute here. Any other non-debugging questions? Cool. If you are stuck, we'll go ahead and work on that. Everybody go take a break. At 11, we'll do, this is optional. Both of these are optional. First, we will do an optional just sit around and ask questions time. It sounded like we had an overwhelming response in the surveys that you wanted an opportunity to just ask whatever questions you have. I'm back there and sitting there too. You can ask that whenever, but we'll have some set time for that. And then after that, we'll talk about the tags problem. Again, optionally, the stuff we had to cut from lecture yesterday. So go take a break. If you are stuck, I will come help.